In 2023, a remarkable thing happened that most people didn't notice. For the first time in recorded history, more military personnel in NATO countries were trained in cyber operations than in tank warfare. Not slightly more, 3 times more. Think about that for a moment. 3 soldiers learning to write code and analyze data streams for everyone learning to drive an armored vehicle. This quiet shift tells us everything about where conflict is heading. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from. And then just listen and enjoy. Here's the question we're exploring today. What will conflict look like when battles happen in server rooms before they happen on streets? When wars can be won or lost before a single shot is fired? When the line between war and peace becomes so blurred, we might not even recognize when we've crossed it. By the end of this series, you'll understand how warfare is transforming in ways that make science fiction look conservative. You'll see why traditional war is becoming not just undesirable, but actually impossible for most nations. And you'll discover what this means for all of us living through this transition into whatever comes next. Let's begin with something that happened just a few years ago, something that changed military thinking forever. In February 2022, when Russian forces moved toward Ukraine, something unexpected occurred. Within hours, a global network of civilian hackers, organized through social media and encrypted channels, launched coordinated attacks on Russian government websites, banks, and propaganda channels. Meanwhile, a private American company, SpaceX, activated thousands of satellite internet terminals across Ukraine, ensuring communication networks stayed online even as ground infrastructure was destroyed. Farmers used commercial drones bought from hobby stores to track and report military movements. Teenagers in Kiev used TikTok to coordinate aid deliveries and document war crimes in real time. This wasn't in the war manuals. Generals trained for decades in conventional warfare watched as conflict unfolded in ways their textbooks never predicted. And they realized something profound. War had already changed. They were just catching up. Walk into any major military academy today, from West Point to the Frunze Academy in Moscow, and you'll notice something striking. The classrooms dedicated to cyber operations, space warfare, and information campaigns now occupy more square footage than those teaching traditional tactics. The reading lists include books on psychology, social media algorithms, and cryptocurrency, as often as they include Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. This isn't a sudden revolution. It's been building quietly for 30 years, since the first Gulf War showed what precision technology could do. Since September 11th demonstrated that small groups could challenge superpowers, since Stuxnet proved that code could destroy centrifuges as effectively as bombs. But now, in 2025, we've reached the tipping point. The old model of warfare is dying, and a new one is being born. Let's talk about cost, because cost shapes everything in human conflict. In 1991, the United States spent roughly $800 million per day during Operation Desert Storm. Expensive? Yes, but manageable for a superpower. By 2003, during the Iraq invasion, that daily cost had nearly tripled. By the time the Afghanistan withdrawal happened in 2021, the total cost had exceeded $2 trillion over 20 years. $2 trillion to fight groups that operated on budgets smaller than a single American aircraft carrier. Do the mathematics. Traditional warfare has become so expensive that only a handful of nations can afford it, and even for them, it's economically devastating. A single F-35 fighter jet costs about $80 million. 1. Training the pilot costs another $6 million. The maintenance, fuel, and support systems add millions more every year. Now compare that to the cost of a sophisticated cyber attack. A team of skilled hackers, some rented server space, and a few months of work. Maybe $10 million total. And that cyber attack can potentially ground that $80 million jet by corrupting its software, or better yet, by disrupting the logistics systems that fuel it, or even better, by destroying the public support for the conflict that funds it. This cost asymmetry is changing everything. It means that wars between peer nations with modern militaries have become exercises in mutual economic suicide. It means that smaller actors can now challenge larger ones in ways that would have been impossible a generation ago. It means that the very nature of what we call victory is being redefined. Consider what happened in Estonia in 2007. Russian hackers, likely state-sponsored, though never officially confirmed, launched massive cyber attacks against this tiny Baltic nation. Banks went offline. Government services stopped functioning. News media websites crashed. Emergency services struggled. For 3 weeks, Estonia, a nation of just over 1 million people, found itself in a state of digital siege. No troops crossed borders. No shots were fired. No tanks rolled through streets. Yet Estonia was under attack as surely as if an army had invaded. And here's what matters. The Estonian government struggled to respond because, technically, according to international law, this wasn't war. There was no Article 5 NATO response, no clear framework for retaliation. The attackers achieved their goal, demonstrating power and creating chaos, while remaining in a gray zone where traditional military alliances and international laws didn't quite apply. Fast forward to today, and that gray zone has become the main battlefield. Nations and non-state actors operate constantly in this space between peace and war, probing systems, testing responses, achieving objectives without ever declaring conflict. China's persistent cyber intrusions into American infrastructure, American and Israeli intelligence operations across the Middle East, Russian disinformation campaigns across Europe, Iranian attacks on Saudi oil facilities using drones that cost thousands but caused billions in damage. This is the new normal. Not war as your grandparents knew it, with clear declarations and defined battlefields, but something more like weather, constant pressure systems moving across the globe, sometimes intensifying into storms, but never really stopping. The military theorists have a name for this: hybrid warfare. But that term almost makes it sound optional, like one approach among many. It's not. It's becoming the only approach that makes strategic sense for most conflicts. When your economy is globally integrated, when your citizens can see what's happening in real time on social media, when your military hardware depends on chips manufactured in the very countries you might fight, when climate change and resource scarcity create pressures that make every nation vulnerable, traditional war becomes almost unthinkable. Almost, but not quite. Because here's the paradox we're living through. Even as traditional war becomes economically and politically impossible, nations are still preparing for it. They're spending more on defense than ever. Global military expenditure in 2024 exceeded $2.4 trillion, the highest in human history. But look closer at what they're buying. Not more tanks and aircraft carriers, though those still exist. They're buying satellites, cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence systems, autonomous drones, and most importantly, they're buying information dominance. The United States Space Force, created in 2019, now has a larger budget than the entire military of most nations. Why? Because modern warfare depends absolutely on satellites, GPS for navigation and targeting, communication satellites for coordinating forces, reconnaissance satellites for intelligence, weather satellites for planning. The nation that controls space controls the information that makes modern military operations possible. China understands this. Their space program isn't primarily about exploration or prestige anymore. It's about creating the infrastructure for future conflict. By 2030, they plan to have a space station, a lunar base, and a satellite network that rivals anything America has built. Not because they want war in space, but because they want to ensure that if conflict comes, they can see, communicate, and coordinate as effectively as any adversary. And it's not just the superpowers. Nations like Turkey, Iran, and North Korea are developing sophisticated drone programs. Small countries like Israel and Singapore are becoming leaders in cyber warfare capabilities. Even non-state actors, from Hezbollah to various hacktivist groups, are developing capabilities that would have required nation-state resources just 20 years ago. This is democratization of military power, and it's deeply unsettling for traditional military establishments. The old rules, where might made right and the strongest military usually won, are dissolving. In this new landscape, creativity, technology, and understanding of systems' vulnerabilities matter more than raw firepower. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. In 2020, Azerbaijan and Armenia fought a war over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. On paper, Armenia had the stronger military, more tanks, more artillery, battle-hardened troops. But Azerbaijan did something different. They deployed Turkish-made Bayraktar drones, cheap by military standards, each costing about $5 million. These drones, operated by troops sitting safely behind screens, destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Armenian armor, artillery, and air defense systems. The war lasted 44 days. Azerbaijan won decisively. The lesson was clear. The side with better technology and information dominance can defeat a larger, more traditional force. Now imagine that scenario scaled up, refined, and deployed by major powers by 2040. Imagine swarms of autonomous drones, each one making its own targeting decisions, coordinating with thousands of others, adapting in real time to enemy responses. Imagine cyber attacks that don't just disable websites, but shut down power grids, contaminate water systems, corrupt financial records. Imagine disinformation campaigns so sophisticated that populations can't tell truth from fabrication, where every video could be a deepfake, every news story potentially manipulated. This is where we're heading. Not might be heading, are heading. The technology exists now. It's just being refined, scaled up, and integrated into military doctrine. But here's what's interesting, and what gives me a measure of calm when thinking about all this. These same technologies that make new forms of conflict possible also make them more visible, more traceable, and potentially more controllable. Every cyber attack leaves digital fingerprints. Every satellite can be observed by other satellites. Every disinformation campaign can be analyzed and exposed. Every autonomous system has vulnerabilities that can be exploited. We're entering an era of total visibility and total vulnerability simultaneously. Nations can see more about their potential adversaries than ever before in history, but they're also more exposed than ever before. This creates a strange kind of stability through mutual transparency. It's harder to surprise your opponent when they can watch your preparations in real time through satellite imagery and signals intelligence. It's harder to win a quick victory when your opponent can mobilize global support through social media before your tanks even cross the border. This is why, paradoxically, we might be entering one of the most peaceful periods in human history, even as we develop the most destructive capabilities ever known. Not because humans have suddenly become peaceful, but because the cost of conflict has risen so high, and the probability of achieving clean victories has dropped so low that most rational actors are choosing other paths. But that's not the whole story. Because not all actors are rational, not all conflicts are between nations, and not all pressures pushing toward violence are going away. Climate change will displace hundreds of millions of people by 2040. Water scarcity will intensify in regions already prone to conflict. Resource competition for rare earth minerals needed for technology will create new friction points. And as power shifts between nations, as China rises and America adapts, as new powers emerge and old ones decline, there will be periods of dangerous instability. So when we ask how future wars will unfold and end by 2040, we're really asking something deeper. How will humanity navigate this transition from one form of civilization to another? From the industrial age that shaped warfare for 2 centuries to whatever comes next, where information matters more than territory, where code can be more powerful than bombs, where the line between war and peace becomes something fluid and uncertain. The answer is unfolding right now, in real time, in dozens of conflicts and competitions around the world. In Ukraine's digital resistance, in China's island building in the South China Sea, in Iran's drone programs and cyber operations, in America's race to maintain technological superiority, in the quiet competitions happening in boardrooms, where tech companies with more wealth than most nations decide which governments to support and which to restrict. This is the landscape of tomorrow's conflicts. Not simple, not clean, not following the rules we've known, but perhaps, just perhaps, forcing us to find new ways to resolve our differences because the old ways have become too costly and too uncertain. In the coming episodes, we'll explore each dimension of this transformation in detail. We'll look at the new battlefields, from cyberspace to orbit. We'll examine the actors, from nations to corporations to individuals with unprecedented power. We'll understand the economic and resource pressures driving conflict. We'll see how wars might start in this new era, and critically, how they might end when victory itself has become difficult to define. But for now, sit with this one thought. We're living through a transformation as significant as the invention of gunpowder or the development of nuclear weapons. The difference is, this time, the transformation is happening in dozens of technologies simultaneously, and it's happening faster than our institutions can adapt. What that means for the next 15 years is what we're here to understand together. When we think of battlefields, we picture terrain, hills to capture, rivers to cross, cities to hold. But by 2040, the most important battlefields won't be places you can visit. They'll be domains that exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Let's start with the most critical one, cyberspace. Right now, as you listen to this, there are thousands of cyber operations happening globally. Not attacks in the dramatic sense, but probing, testing, mapping. Chinese intelligence services are methodically cataloging every vulnerability in American power grid systems. Russian hackers are embedding dormant malware in European financial networks. American Cyber Command is doing the same in reverse. Iranian groups are practicing attacks on water treatment facilities. Israeli units are refining methods to disable air defense systems remotely. This is the new normal. A constant, low-level conflict that never stops, where the goal isn't immediate destruction, but preparation. Building the capability to cause massive damage instantly if needed, while maintaining plausible deniability and staying below the threshold that would trigger military response. Think of it like placing bombs throughout your opponent's infrastructure, but never detonating them. Just letting them know the bombs are there. This is deterrence for the digital age, and it's fundamentally changing how nations relate to each other. The scale is staggering. In 2024, the United States government detected over 40,000 significant cyber intrusion attempts per day. Per day. Most are automated probes, but thousands are sophisticated, targeted operations by skilled teams. And those are just the ones they detected. Security experts estimate that for every breach discovered, 3 to 5 go unnoticed for months or years. Now project that forward 15 years. By 2040, every critical system in developed nations will be networked and potentially vulnerable. Your power comes from grids managed by computer systems. Your water flows through treatment plants controlled by software. Your money exists as data in bank servers. Your food supply depends on logistics networks coordinated through digital platforms. Your transportation relies on GPS satellites and traffic management systems. Your healthcare runs on electronic records and internet-connected devices. All of it is a potential target, and all of it is being targeted right now. But here's what makes cyber warfare so different from traditional conflict. Attribution is nearly impossible. When a bomb explodes, you can analyze fragments and trace it back to manufacturer and buyer. When a cyber attack happens, the trail can be routed through dozens of countries, disguised to look like it came from somewhere else, or made to appear as random system failure rather than deliberate attack. In 2017, the NotPetya malware attack, widely attributed to Russian military intelligence, caused over $10 billion in damage to companies worldwide. It was disguised as ransomware, but was actually designed to destroy data permanently. The attack hit Ukraine hardest, but also damaged companies across Europe and America, including Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, and Merck, a major pharmaceutical corporation. Yet Russia has never officially acknowledged responsibility. They couldn't be proven guilty in any international court. There was no clear mechanism for retaliation. This ambiguity is a feature, not a bug. It allows nations to wage war without declaring it, to achieve strategic objectives without triggering the international consequences of open conflict. By 2040, we'll see cyber operations become even more sophisticated. Artificial intelligence will enable attacks that adapt in real time, that learn from defensive responses, that can operate autonomously for months while hiding inside target systems. We'll see attacks that don't just disable systems, but subtly corrupt them, changing data in ways that create cascading failures over time. Imagine a power grid that gradually becomes unstable because load calculations have been imperceptibly altered, or a financial system where transaction records are slowly corrupted, or military logistics where ammunition counts are wrong by just enough to create shortages at critical moments. These attacks won't look like attacks. They'll look like aging infrastructure, human error, or bad luck. That's what makes them so dangerous and so attractive to military planners. Now let's look up. Space has become the second critical battlefield, and most people don't realize how dependent modern life has become on what's orbiting above us. There are currently over 8,000 active satellites circling Earth. They provide GPS navigation, enable global communications, monitor weather, track military movements, coordinate drone operations, and make modern warfare possible. Without satellites, military forces become blind, deaf, and lost. Precision weapons lose their precision. Communication becomes difficult. Intelligence gathering reverts to methods from the 1950s. China understands this perfectly. In 2007, they demonstrated anti-satellite weapons by destroying one of their own old weather satellites. The message was clear: if conflict comes, we can blind you. Since then, multiple nations have developed similar capabilities. The United States, Russia, India, and likely others have weapons that can destroy or disable satellites. But destroying satellites creates another problem: debris. That 2007 Chinese test created over 3,000 pieces of trackable debris that will orbit Earth for decades, endangering other satellites. A major conflict in space could create so much debris that it makes certain orbital paths unusable for generations, a phenomenon called Kessler syndrome. This would be catastrophic not just for military operations, but for civilian life globally. So the competition in space is evolving toward more subtle methods: cyber attacks against satellite control systems, directed energy weapons that can temporarily blind or permanently damage sensors without creating debris, small hunter satellites that can approach and disable other satellites, jamming and spoofing GPS signals to create confusion without permanent destruction. By 2040, space will be congested with both functional satellites and debris, monitored by multiple nations all watching each other, each side capable of severely damaging the other's capabilities, but restrained by the knowledge that doing so would harm everyone. It's mutually assured disruption, a space-age version of Cold War logic. The third battlefield is one we're only beginning to understand: the human mind itself, accessed through information networks. We're not talking about simple propaganda anymore. We're talking about sophisticated psychological operations enabled by big data, artificial intelligence, and social media algorithms. The ability to identify individuals susceptible to certain messages, to craft those messages specifically for them, to deliver them through trusted sources, and to do this at a scale of millions or billions of people simultaneously. In 2016, Russia's interference in the American election demonstrated this capability at a relatively crude level. By 2024, the techniques had become far more sophisticated. Deepfake videos indistinguishable from real footage, AI-generated text that perfectly mimics writing styles, coordinated campaigns across multiple platforms that create the illusion of grassroots movements while actually being orchestrated by foreign intelligence services. The goal isn't just to spread misinformation. It's to create such confusion that people stop believing anything, to polarize society so deeply they can't respond coherently to external threats, to undermine trust in institutions and democratic processes, to make populations doubt their own perceptions of reality. By 2040, this form of warfare will be refined to an art. We'll see AI systems that can analyze millions of social media posts to map the exact emotional and cognitive vulnerabilities of specific populations. We'll see campaigns that adjust their messaging in real time based on how people respond. We'll see the blurring of reality and fabrication become so complete that determining truth will require sophisticated technical analysis beyond the capability of ordinary citizens. This creates a society that's constantly uncertain, constantly suspicious, constantly divided. And a divided, uncertain society can't wage war effectively. It can barely govern itself. This is conquest without occupation, victory without battle. There's a fourth emerging battlefield that we're only beginning to recognize: the biological domain. Not bioweapons in the traditional sense, though those remain a concern. Something more subtle and potentially more transformative: the ability to engineer diseases that target specific genetic markers, the use of gene editing technologies like CRISPR for enhancement or sabotage, the collection of genetic data from populations as intelligence gathering. China has been systematically collecting genetic data from millions of people, both its own citizens and through companies like BGI that process genetic tests globally. Why? Partly for medical research, certainly, but also because genetic data is strategic information. Understanding the genetic vulnerabilities of populations, developing treatments or enhancements specific to your own population, potentially developing biologicals that affect some groups more than others. This sounds like science fiction, but the technology exists now. By 2040, it will be refined and accessible. The implications for conflict are profound and troubling. Wars could potentially be fought with biologicals designed to incapacitate rather than kill, to create chronic illness that drains healthcare systems, or to target food crops specific to certain regions. The restraints here are partly ethical, partly practical, and partly based on the unpredictable nature of biological agents. Release a virus, even a targeted one, and you risk it mutating and affecting your own population. The consequences are too uncertain, which provides some measure of deterrence. But in a desperate conflict, those restraints might not hold. Finally, there's the economic battlefield, which has always existed, but is now operating at speeds and scales never before possible. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Western nations imposed financial sanctions within hours. Russian banks were cut off from SWIFT, the international payment system. Billions in foreign reserves were frozen. The ruble collapsed. This was economic warfare conducted at digital speed, and it was devastating. More damaging to Russia's capabilities, in some ways, than any military operation. But it also revealed vulnerabilities in the global financial system and prompted nations like China to develop alternatives to dollar-dominated networks. By 2040, economic warfare will be even faster and more surgical. Sanctions targeting specific individuals or companies implemented in minutes. Cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies enabling both new forms of payment that bypass traditional systems and new forms of tracking and control. Central bank digital currencies, giving governments unprecedented ability to monitor and control economic activity. In future conflicts, the first strikes might not be missiles or cyber attacks. They might be freezing of assets, manipulation of currency markets, or disruption of supply chains. An opponent can be brought to its knees without firing a shot, just by denying access to global financial networks and critical resources. These 5 domains, cyberspace, space, information, biology, and economics, are where future wars will primarily be fought. They're interconnected, each one affecting the others. A cyber attack can disable satellites. Information warfare can justify economic sanctions. Space capabilities enable precision strikes. economic pressure can force concessions without military action. By 2040, military strategists will think in terms of these domains first and traditional battlefield operations second. The nation that dominates across all 5 domains, or at least prevents opponents from dominating them, will win conflicts before they escalate to traditional warfare. This is the landscape where tomorrow's battles unfold, not in trenches or streets, but in servers and orbits, in mines and markets, in laboratories and data centers. Understanding this landscape is the first step to understanding how future wars will begin, how they'll be fought, and how they might end. The players in future conflicts look very different from the armies and nations that dominated warfare for centuries. By 2040, the question of who can wage war has become far more complex and far more interesting than simply counting tanks and soldiers. Let's start with nation-states, because despite everything changing, they remain the primary actors. But they're adapting in ways that would have seemed impossible just a generation ago. Take China. In 2015, they undertook the largest military reorganization since the 1950s, creating a strategic support force dedicated to space, cyber, and electronic warfare. This wasn't just another military branch. It was a signal that China understood the future of conflict would be decided in domains most people can't see. Today, this force employs hundreds of thousands of personnel, more than the entire active military of most European nations. They're not training to shoot rifles. They're learning quantum computing, satellite operations, artificial intelligence, and network penetration. By 2040, China's military strategy will be built around what they call informatized warfare. The idea is simple. Whoever controls information wins. If you can see the battlefield better than your opponent, communicate faster, process data more quickly, and disrupt their ability to do the same, you win before the first shot is fired. They're investing hundreds of billions in making this vision real. From AI-powered command systems to quantum communication satellites that are theoretically impossible to hack. Russia took a different path. Recognizing they couldn't match American or Chinese spending, they focused on asymmetric capabilities. Their cyber units, particularly the GRU's main intelligence directorate, have become perhaps the most aggressive and skilled in the world. They've proven repeatedly that a relatively small investment in skilled hackers can achieve strategic effects that would require billions in conventional military capability. The 2015 cyber attack on Ukraine's power grid was a proof of concept. The 2017 NotPetya attack was demonstration of scale. The ongoing operations against NATO countries are preparation for future conflicts. Russia has essentially created a model for how a declining power can remain strategically relevant through clever use of technology and willingness to operate in gray zones where rules are unclear. The United States, meanwhile, is trying to maintain technological superiority while adapting institutions built for 20th century warfare. The creation of Space Force in 2019 and Cyber Command's elevation to a full combatant command show they understand the shift. But American military culture, built around conventional superiority and overwhelming force, is struggling to fully embrace these new domains. By 2040, the U.S. strategy will likely center on what they call multi-domain operations, the ability to coordinate actions across all domains simultaneously. Imagine a scenario where space assets track targets, cyber operations disable air defenses, information campaigns undermine political support. while traditional forces conduct precision strikes. This integration across domains is where America sees its advantage, the ability to orchestrate complexity better than any potential adversary. But here's what's fascinating. Smaller nations are finding ways to matter in this new landscape. Israel, with a population of 9 million, has become a cyber superpower through heavy investment in technical education and by leveraging its intelligence services. Unit 8200, their Signals Intelligence Corps, has become a breeding ground for cyber talent that flows between military and private sector, creating an ecosystem of expertise that rivals much larger nations. Singapore, small enough that traditional military power could never guarantee its security, has invested heavily in cyber capabilities and AI. They're developing autonomous defense systems that could potentially defend their tiny territory against much larger neighbors. Estonia, traumatized by the 2007 cyber attacks, has become one of the world's leaders in cyber defense and digital governance. These examples show that in future warfare, size matters less than it used to. A small nation with excellent cyber capabilities and smart strategic partnerships can be more secure than a larger nation with conventional military superiority but digital vulnerabilities. Now let's talk about the actors that didn't exist in traditional warfare, non-state groups with capabilities that once required nation-state resources. In 2021, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack was conducted by DarkSide, a cyber-criminal group. They shut down a pipeline that supplies 45% of fuel to the American East Coast. Gas stations ran dry. Panic buying created shortages. The company paid $4.4 million in ransom. This wasn't a nation-state attack. It was criminals, possibly fewer than 20 people, who paralyzed critical infrastructure of the world's most powerful country. By 2040, such groups will be even more capable. We're already seeing hacktivist collectives, like Anonymous, conducting operations that affect governments. We're seeing criminal organizations with cyber capabilities rivaling some national intelligence services. We're seeing terrorist groups using drones, encrypted communications, and social media with sophistication that was unimaginable 20 years ago. The Islamic State at its peak was producing propaganda videos with production quality matching professional studios, recruiting globally through social media, using encryption that frustrated intelligence services, and coordinating complex operations across continents. They were defeated militarily, but they demonstrated what a motivated non-state actor could achieve with modern technology. Hezbollah in Lebanon has evolved from a militia to something resembling a state within a state, with its own satellite TV network, sophisticated drone capabilities, and cyber operations. They've learned from Iranian partners, but developed their own expertise. In any future conflict with Israel, they would wage information warfare and cyber operations alongside traditional military actions. These non-state actors benefit from something traditional militaries struggle with: flexibility and deniability. They're not bound by international laws. They don't worry about diplomatic consequences. They can take risks that nations can't, operate in legal gray zones, and dissolve or reform when pressured. By 2040, the line between non-state actors and nation-states will be even more blurred. We'll see governments using proxies with plausible deniability. We'll see criminal organizations being tacitly supported by nations as long as they target the right enemies. We'll see hacktivist groups that might or might not be intelligence operations in disguise. Then there are the corporations, and this is where things get truly unprecedented. In previous eras, companies supplied militaries with weapons and equipment. Now, some companies have capabilities that exceed what most militaries possess. SpaceX can launch satellites cheaper and faster than any government. They control Starlink, a constellation of satellites that proved decisive in the Ukraine conflict by keeping communications running when ground infrastructure was destroyed. Elon Musk, a private citizen, made decisions about where that capability would be deployed and how it would be used, decisions that affected the course of a war. Google and Microsoft have AI capabilities that intelligence services desperately want access to. Amazon Web Services hosts enormous amounts of government data and provides cloud computing for military operations. These companies have leverage over governments in ways that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. Palantir Technologies provides data analysis software used by military and intelligence agencies globally. Their software helps coordinate operations, analyze intelligence, and make targeting decisions. In effect, they're part of the military-industrial complex, except they're not manufacturing missiles or tanks. They're manufacturing the ability to make sense of information, which is arguably more valuable. By 2040, we'll see corporations with their own intelligence, capabilities, their own security forces that rival national militaries, and economic power that gives them political influence approaching that of medium-sized nations. They'll be actors in conflicts, sometimes working with governments, sometimes pursuing their own interests, always operating in ways that blur traditional categories. Consider cybersecurity firms that discover vulnerabilities in software. Should they report those vulnerabilities to be fixed, or sell them to intelligence agencies who want to exploit them? Some do both, creating a market where zero-day exploits, vulnerabilities unknown to software manufacturers, sell for millions of dollars. This market directly affects military capabilities and national security, yet it operates largely in the shadows, driven by private profit. Private military contractors have existed for decades, but they're evolving. By 2040, we'll see private forces with advanced capabilities, not just soldiers for hire, but experts in cyber warfare, drone operations, intelligence analysis, and information campaigns. They'll operate in conflicts worldwide, sometimes openly under contract to governments, sometimes in shadier arrangements where their employers are harder to identify. The Wagner Group, Russia's notorious private military company, has operated in Syria, Libya, Central African Republic, and Ukraine. They provide Russia with the ability to project power while maintaining some deniability. They represent a model that other nations are likely to copy, privatizing certain military functions to create flexibility and avoid direct attribution. Now let's talk about the tools these various actors use, because the technology is evolving faster than doctrine or law. Drones have revolutionized warfare in just 15 years. In 2010, only a handful of nations had armed drones, mostly large, expensive systems like the American Predator. Today, over 90 countries have military drones. Turkey's Bayraktar TB2, which proves so effective in multiple conflicts, costs about $5 million. That's less than many tanks, and it can destroy targets worth far more. By 2040, we'll see drone swarms, hundreds or thousands of small, autonomous drones working together, making collective decisions, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. The cost per drone might be just thousands of dollars, but coordinating thousands of them creates a capability that's extremely difficult to defend against. These swarms won't need human operators making real-time decisions. They'll have AI sophisticated enough to identify targets, coordinate with each other, and adapt to defensive measures autonomously. The ethical implications are staggering. We're moving toward weapons that can select and engage targets without human intervention. The technology exists now. The only restraint is policy, and policy can change when nations feel threatened. Artificial intelligence is perhaps the most transformative tool. It's already being used for intelligence analysis, processing vast amounts of data faster than any human team could. It's being used for predictive modeling, trying to anticipate adversary actions. It's being developed for autonomous systems, from drones to cyber defense tools. By 2040, AI will be integrated into every aspect of military operations. Decision-making will be augmented by AI systems that can process information and present options faster than human commanders. Logistics will be optimized by AI. Training will use AI to create realistic simulations. Even strategy itself might be shaped by AI analysis of thousands of scenarios. But here's the concerning part. AI is still not fully understood, even by its creators. Advanced AI systems make decisions in ways that humans can't always explain. In warfare, where mistakes can be catastrophic, relying on systems we don't fully understand creates profound risks. Yet the competitive pressure is intense. No nation wants to fall behind in AI military applications, so they push forward despite uncertainties. Quantum computing, still in its early stages, will by 2040 potentially break most current encryption systems. This means that secure communications today might not be secure tomorrow. Nations are already collecting encrypted communications they can't currently read, betting that future quantum computers will crack them. This is called harvest now, decrypt later, and it's creating a strange situation where today's secrets might be tomorrow's open books. The race is on to develop quantum-resistant encryption and to build operational quantum computers first. Whoever achieves a breakthrough could potentially read their adversary's most secret communications while keeping their own secure. The advantage would be immense, possibly decisive. Hypersonic missiles, traveling at 5 times the speed of sound or faster, are being developed by multiple nations. They're extremely difficult to defend against with current systems. By 2040, they might make traditional missile defense obsolete, changing the calculations about first strikes and deterrence. Directed energy weapons, lasers powerful enough to destroy drones or missiles, are moving from testing to deployment. They're attractive because each shot costs essentially nothing compared to traditional missiles, and they're extremely precise. By 2040, they'll likely be standard equipment on ships and at important facilities. All these tools share certain characteristics. They're becoming cheaper, more accessible, more autonomous, and more integrated with information systems. The barrier to entry for sophisticated military capability is dropping, while the potential impact of those capabilities is rising. This creates a world where more actors can do more damage, where wars might start by accident through AI miscalculation or system failure, where attribution becomes nearly impossible, and where the line between war and peace becomes increasingly blurred. The actors, in future, conflicts range from superpowers to small nations to corporations to criminal groups to individuals with exceptional skills. The tools they use range from satellites to viruses to algorithms to drones. Understanding who these players are and what they're capable of is essential to understanding how conflicts will unfold by 2040. To understand how future wars will unfold, we must look beyond armies and technology into the heart of what every modern conflict is really about: control of resources and economic power. By 2040, the contest for water, minerals, energy, and habitable land will shape the logic of war as deeply as ideology and politics once did. First, consider water. The World Resources Institute projects that by 2040, nearly a quarter of humanity will live in regions facing extremely high water stress. Rivers like the Tigris, Nile, and Indus are losing volume, while rainfall patterns become unpredictable. Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan, all countries with histories of conflict, will find that simple access to clean water is strategic. Already today, Ethiopia and Egypt spar over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. India and China negotiate and sometimes threaten over Himalayan glaciers. These aren't pure resource disputes. They're proto-conflicts escalating in slow motion. As water becomes scarcer, expect more confrontation, not in the form of invading armies, but in bites, cyber sabotage of reservoirs, political interference, digital propaganda, sowing mistrust within and between nations. The race for rare earth minerals and battery metals is another front quietly heating up. Lithium, cobalt, and nickel are no longer just commodities. They're the foundation for the next generation of energy and defense technologies. Most rare earth processing happens in China. The Democratic Republic of Congo leads in cobalt mining, Australia for lithium. By 2030, global demand for these minerals will double, and no national government wants to rely on competitors for supply. Already, the United States and European Union are investing billions in local mining, recycling, and alternative battery technologies. Expect these initiatives to clash with Chinese interests, possibly through economic pressure, industrial espionage, or proxy resource conflicts in Africa and Latin America. The energy transition itself is reshaping economic warfare. As nations move away from oil, classic oil politics evolve into new energy politics. Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine triggered a global rethink not just of energy security, but of what energy war means now. Today, infrastructure attacks target electricity grids and natural gas pipelines, while drone and cyber strikes threaten renewable installations powering whole regions. By 2040, controlling the green grid may be as strategically vital as controlling oil shipping routes was in the 20th century. Imagine a future where a nation's wind farm algorithms are manipulated remotely, gradually, destabilizing the energy balance of entire cities. A silent weapon with persistent effects. Sanctions and financial warfare have replaced many kinetic operations. Western governments froze more than $300 billion in Russian foreign reserves virtually overnight after the Ukraine invasion, not through bombs, but code and legal orders. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are accelerating this trend. By 2040, programmable money allows governments to instantly block or redirect financial transactions, responding to threats in seconds. These capabilities add a new dimension to warfare, less visible, but devastating. Freezing tech company assets or blocking critical trade flows may have the same strategic impact as disabling a fleet or shooting down a satellite. Supply chain disruptions will become preferred tactics. COVID-19 revealed how vulnerable global logistics have become. By 2040, targeting supply chains, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, food, is a way to pressure or destabilize adversaries without direct confrontation. Imagine a conflict where a nation faces not bombs, but mysterious delays in the delivery of life-saving insulin or microchips essential for communication systems, destabilizing domestic society and government. Climate migration turns all of this into a cauldron of new pressures. By 2040, hundreds of millions displaced by sea level rise, drought, and heat waves will seek new homes. Regions with food and water will be forced to negotiate not only how much to share, but with whom. Conflicts may begin as border skirmishes, but quickly expand to encompass cyber, economic, and resource battles. Host nations might weaponize access to infrastructure or citizenship. Sending nations might retaliate in cyberspace, economics, or alliance politics. It's important to stress, direct military confrontation remains rare because the economic costs are so high. Proxy conflicts, economic sanctions, cyber attacks, and information warfare have become preferred methods because they're deniable, scalable, and often reversible. Countries now calculate warfare not just in terms of territory gained or lost, but of global supply chain resilience, currency valuations, bond markets, and the stability of their own energy and food systems. Adaptability is humanity's greatest resource. We've always built new systems when the old ones were failing. By 2040, nations, corporations, and communities will continue to invent ways to insulate themselves. From vertical farming and water recycling to decentralized energy generation and advanced peace-building economics, solutions will emerge in parallel with threats. But the competition over resources and economic leverage will remain at the core of how, and even whether, future wars unfold or are ended. The new economic and resource battlefields aren't just about money or minerals. They're about survival, resilience, and strategic adaptation. Whoever masters these dimensions will shape the landscape of conflict and peace for decades to come. The way wars start by 2040 will look nothing like the dramatic declarations and border crossings of previous centuries. Instead, conflicts will emerge from gray zones, ambiguities, and slow escalations that make it nearly impossible to point to a single moment and say, "This is when war began." Let's explore the most likely pathways to future conflict, because understanding how wars start is the first step toward preventing them or ending them quickly. The first and most probable scenario is what military strategists call gray zone warfare, taken to its logical conclusion. This is conflict that stays deliberately below the threshold of open war, but achieves strategic objectives through accumulated pressure over time. Imagine this scenario playing out in the South China Sea by 2035. China has been building artificial islands and militarizing them for decades. Now they've established a comprehensive surveillance network, deployed advanced anti-ship missiles, and created what amounts to a no-go zone for other nations' military vessels. They haven't declared war on anyone. They haven't invaded territory. They've simply made it so costly and risky for others to operate in these waters that countries gradually stop trying. Vietnam, the Philippines, and other claimants protest diplomatically, but lack the military power to challenge China directly. The United States condemns the actions, but doesn't want to risk war with a nuclear power over reefs and fishing rights. So China wins, not through dramatic invasion, but through persistent, incremental actions that collectively achieve their goal of controlling vital sea lanes. This is how future conflicts begin, not with a bang, but with 1,000 small pushes that add up to a major shift in power. By the time anyone realizes war has effectively happened, it's already over, and reversing the outcome would require an escalation nobody wants to risk. The second pathway is accidental escalation through AI and autonomous systems. This is the scenario that keeps military planners awake at night because it could happen faster than human decision makers can react. Picture this. It's 2038, and tensions are high between India and Pakistan over water rights to rivers flowing from the Himalayas. Both nations have deployed AI-powered cyber defense systems that automatically respond to perceived threats. An Indian system detects what it interprets as a Pakistani cyber intrusion into power grid controls. Within milliseconds, it launches a counterattack, disabling part of Pakistan's air defense network. Pakistan's AI defense system, designed to respond instantly to any attack on critical infrastructure, retaliates by targeting Indian satellites used for military communication. Within minutes, both nations' early warning systems are lighting up with alerts. Military commanders on both sides are trying to understand what's happening, but events are moving faster than human cognition. Each AI system is making decisions based on its programming to respond to threats, escalating through predetermined protocols. By the time human leaders are fully briefed and ready to make decisions, the situation has spiraled toward potential nuclear confrontation. This isn't science fiction. We're already seeing AI systems make decisions faster than humans can monitor them. In financial markets, automated trading algorithms have caused flash crashes where billions in value disappeared in seconds before anyone understood what was happening. Military AI will be even more consequential, and the pressure to deploy it comes from the fact that whoever can observe, decide, and act faster has an enormous advantage. The risk is that we create systems so fast and so complex that we lose the ability to control them in crisis moments. Wars could start not because anyone wanted them, but because algorithms misinterpreted data or responded to threats that weren't actually threats. The third pathway is through cascading climate disasters, creating refugee crises that overwhelm borders and international systems. This is the slow-motion catastrophe that creates conditions for rapid conflict. By 2040, parts of South Asia will experience wet bulb temperatures that make outdoor work impossible during summer months. Hundreds of millions will need to move or face death from heat exposure. Where do they go? Bangladesh, already vulnerable to sea level rise, might see 50 million people displaced. India, Pakistan, Myanmar, none want to accept massive refugee populations, but the alternative is watching people die. Desperate populations don't wait for permission. They move. Borders become overwhelmed. Governments deploy military forces to control migration, creating humanitarian disasters. International aid organizations struggle to respond. Host populations become resentful as resources strain. Politicians exploit fear and anger, framing refugees as threats to national security. In this environment, conflicts erupt not from grand strategy, but from desperation and mismanagement. A border incident where soldiers fire on migrants becomes an international crisis. Terrorist groups exploit the chaos, recruiting from displaced populations. Nations blame each other for creating or failing to manage the crisis. Cyber attacks target relief organizations and government systems. Information warfare amplifies fear and hatred. Before anyone fully realizes it, multiple nations are in a state of undeclared conflict, fighting not over ideology or territory in the traditional sense, but over who bears the burden of climate displacement and how resources are allocated in a world where millions are on the move. The fourth scenario involves economic warfare spiraling into kinetic conflict. This pathway starts with financial weapons, but escalates when nations realize they're losing economically and decide military action is their only option. Imagine China and the United States locked in an economic Cold War by 2037. The US has restricted Chinese access to advanced semiconductors and AI technologies. China has responded by dominating rare earth mineral supply chains and threatening to cut off exports. Both sides have deployed increasingly sophisticated financial sanctions, each trying to strangle the other's economy without firing shots. Then something breaks. Perhaps China's economy, struggling with demographics and debt, faces a crisis that threatens Communist Party control. Or perhaps the United States, dealing with its own internal divisions and economic problems, decides it can't afford to let China continue growing in power. Whatever the trigger, one side makes a move that crosses a line, seizing assets, cutting vital supply chains, or implementing sanctions so severe they amount to economic siege. The other side concludes that accepting this new reality means permanent decline. Military options start looking not just possible, but necessary. If we're already at war economically, the thinking goes, why not use our military advantages while we still have them? A blockade of Taiwan begins, or American forces accidentally engage Chinese vessels in disputed waters, or cyber attacks escalate from infrastructure disruption to actual destruction. The economic war, which seemed like a way to avoid military conflict, becomes the pathway to it. The fifth, and perhaps most insidious pathway, is through information warfare that creates realities so divergent that nations can't even agree on basic facts, making diplomacy impossible and conflict inevitable. By 2040, deepfake technology and AI-generated content will be so sophisticated that determining truth requires forensic analysis most people can't perform. Now imagine a crisis where Nation A claims Nation B committed an atrocity, perhaps killing civilians, using chemical weapons, or attacking medical facilities. Nation B denies it and provides evidence suggesting the footage is fabricated or staged by Nation A. Both sides present compelling evidence to their populations and the international community. Both sides genuinely believe their version, or at least their populations do. International observers can't determine truth quickly enough. The UN Security Council is paralyzed by vetoes. Social media amplifies both narratives, with AI bots and human users creating echo chambers where each side's version is reinforced. In this environment of radical uncertainty, nations make decisions based on what they believe to be true, but those beliefs are fundamentally incompatible. One side moves to punish what it sees as an atrocity. The other side views that as aggression based on lies. Actions taken in what each side sees as self-defense look like attacks to the other. Escalation follows, driven not by malice, but by incompatible realities. This is warfare in the post-truth era, where the battlefield includes perception itself and conflicts begin because nations can no longer establish shared understanding of basic facts. There's one more scenario worth considering: the deliberate crisis manufactured by a leader or regime that needs external conflict to maintain internal control. This is the oldest path to war, but with modern tools, it becomes more dangerous. A government facing domestic unrest, economic collapse, or loss of legitimacy might deliberately provoke an external crisis to rally the population. distract from internal problems, or create conditions for crackdown. With cyber capabilities, they could stage a false flag attack that appears to come from a rival nation. With information warfare, they could manufacture a crisis that seems real to their population, even if the international community is skeptical. By 2040, the tools for creating manufactured crises will be more sophisticated and harder to detect. A desperate regime with advanced cyber and AI capabilities could potentially create a situation that spirals out of its control, starting a conflict that nobody actually wanted, but that serves someone's immediate political needs. What unites all these pathways is uncertainty and speed. Unlike historical wars with clear declarations and obvious starting points, future conflicts will emerge from ambiguous situations where determining who started what, and even whether war has actually begun, becomes nearly impossible. This ambiguity is partly deliberate. Nations benefit from operating below the threshold of obvious war. But it's also an inherent feature of modern technology and global interconnection. Systems are so complex, events move so fast, information is so manipulated, that even well-intentioned observers struggle to understand what's actually happening until it's too late to prevent escalation. By 2040, the question won't be whether wars happen, but whether we can even recognize them as wars in the traditional sense, or whether conflict becomes a permanent condition that we learn to live with, manage, and hopefully contain before it escalates to catastrophic levels. Understanding these pathways is essential because prevention requires recognizing the early signs. If we know conflicts might start through AI miscalculation, we can build in safeguards and human oversight. If we know climate migration creates pressures, we can invest in adaptation and international cooperation. If we know information warfare enables manufactured crises, we can strengthen independent verification and critical thinking. The future isn't predetermined. These scenarios are possibilities, not certainties. But they're based on current trajectories and real capabilities that exist today. How we respond to these emerging risks will shape whether future wars happen at all, and if they do, whether we can end them before they consume us. If understanding how future wars begin is complex, understanding how they end is even more challenging. The nature of victory itself is being redefined, and with it, the entire concept of how conflicts conclude. Traditional wars ended with clear outcomes. One side surrendered, signed a treaty, ceded territory, or paid reparations. There were ceremonies, documents, dates we could point to and say, this is when the war ended. The Treaty of Versailles, the Japanese surrender on the USS Missouri, the fall of the Berlin Wall. These were endpoints, however imperfect, that marked transitions from war to peace. But in the conflicts of 2040, where does a cyber war end? When does an information campaign conclude? How do you sign a peace treaty for a conflict that was never officially declared? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're practical challenges that diplomats and military strategists are already grappling with. Let's start with the most fundamental shift. Victory in future conflicts will rarely mean total defeat of an enemy. Instead, it will mean achieving specific objectives while maintaining enough ambiguity that both sides can claim some success. This might sound like a recipe for unresolved conflicts, and in some ways it is. But it's also potentially more stable than the total victories of the past, which often sowed seeds for future wars. Consider a hypothetical cyber conflict between two major powers by 2037. Nation A launches sophisticated attacks on Nation B's financial systems, causing temporary disruptions and economic damage. Nation B retaliates by compromising Nation A's power grid controls and military communication networks. Both sides achieve some objectives. Both suffer some damage, and both realize that further escalation could spiral into catastrophic consequences neither wants. How does this end? Not with surrender, but with de-escalation. Perhaps through back-channel diplomatic communications, both sides agree to cease active operations while maintaining their capabilities as deterrent. Neither admits defeat, neither apologizes, neither even officially acknowledges the conflict happened. But the attacks stop, systems are quietly secured, and life gradually returns to normal. This is what military theorists call termination by mutual exhaustion and recognition of stalemate. It's unsatisfying compared to clear victories, but it's increasingly how modern conflicts conclude. Both sides claim they achieved their objectives, warned off the opponent, and protected their interests. The public in both nations might not even fully realize a conflict occurred. And life goes on, with the implicit understanding that neither side wants to escalate to the next level. Economic warfare creates similar ambiguous endings. When sanctions are the primary weapon, victory becomes about who can endure economic pain longer and maintain domestic political stability. The conflict ends not when one side surrenders, but when economic pressure creates political changes that satisfy the aggressor's objectives, or when the aggressor realizes continued pressure isn't achieving goals and abandons the strategy. Look at how sanctions on Iran have evolved over decades. They've never fully achieved their stated objectives of stopping nuclear development, but they've constrained Iranian capabilities and created negotiating pressure. The conflict hasn't ended. It's just reached a kind of equilibrium where both sides continue their strategies at lower intensity, occasionally escalating through incidents like the Soleimani assassination or attacks on shipping, then de-escalating again. This permanent state of managed tension might be the future of how many conflicts end by not really ending at all, just stabilizing at tolerable levels. Technology is creating new mechanisms for conflict termination that didn't exist before. International organizations are developing rapid response cyber forensics teams that can investigate attacks and attribute responsibility with enough credibility that neutral nations accept their findings. This creates pressure for accountability even in gray zone operations. If a nation is caught definitively conducting attacks that violate international norms, the diplomatic and economic costs might outweigh the benefits, creating incentives to cease operations. Blockchain technology and distributed ledger systems are being explored as ways to create verifiable records of agreements and commitments. Imagine peace agreements where verification isn't dependent on trust, but on transparent, tamper-proof systems that all parties can monitor. This could reduce the uncertainty that often causes peace agreements to collapse. Artificial intelligence might play a paradoxical role in ending conflicts. While AI can accelerate escalation, it can also identify off-ramps and de-escalation pathways that human negotiators miss. AI systems analyzing thousands of historical conflicts and current conditions might suggest novel solutions that satisfy core interests of all parties, breaking deadlocks that human bias and emotion perpetuate. But the most powerful force for ending future conflicts might be the very thing that makes them possible: global economic interdependence. the 2022 sanctions on Russia demonstrated something profound. When economic systems are deeply interconnected, the cost of conflict extends far beyond the combatants. European energy prices spiked. Global food supplies were disrupted. Inflation affected economies worldwide. This created pressure from third parties who had no direct stake in the conflict but suffered consequences, pressure that pushed toward resolution. By 2040, this interdependence will be even deeper. Supply chains for critical technologies will span dozens of nations. Financial systems will be so integrated that disrupting one creates cascading effects everywhere. Climate challenges will require global cooperation that conflict disrupts. This creates a constituency for peace that didn't exist in previous eras. Not just the combatants and their allies, but the entire global system that suffers when major powers are in conflict. This might manifest in new forms of international pressure. Not traditional diplomacy through governments, but economic actors, tech companies, civil society organizations, and populations using tools of connectivity to demand de-escalation. We saw hints of this when athletes, artists, and businesses withdrew from Russia after the Ukraine invasion. By 2040, these mechanisms will be more organized and potentially more effective. There's also the exhaustion factor, which will work differently than in traditional wars. In conventional warfare, exhaustion means running out of soldiers, weapons, or money. In cyber and information warfare, exhaustion means running out of political will and public patience. Populations tire of uncertainty, of constant alerts, of economic disruption. They pressure their governments to find resolutions, even if those resolutions are ambiguous. This is where domestic politics becomes crucial to ending conflicts. In democratic nations, leaders who can't show progress toward resolution face electoral consequences. In authoritarian nations, prolonged conflict that creates economic hardship threatens regime stability. Either way, there's pressure towards some form of resolution, even if it's just reducing the intensity of operations to levels that populations can tolerate. Climate change adds another dimension to how conflicts end. As environmental pressures intensify, the cost of sustained conflict becomes impossible to justify. Nations can't fight each other while simultaneously trying to adapt to rising seas, extreme weather, and resource scarcity. The practical demands of survival create powerful incentives for ending conflicts and redirecting resources toward adaptation and resilience. We might see conflicts end not through victory or defeat, but through mutual recognition that continued fighting is preventing both sides from addressing more existential threats. This is cooperation, born from shared danger rather than shared values, but it can be just as effective. International institutions, though often criticized as ineffective, will adapt and potentially gain new relevance. The United Nations, World Bank, and regional organizations are developing mechanisms specifically for cyber conflict resolution, climate security, and economic warfare mediation. By 2040, these institutions might provide neutral forums where conflicts can be de-escalated without either side appearing to surrender. New institutions might emerge specifically designed for this purpose. Imagine a cyber peace corps that nations can invite in to secure their systems and verify that attacks have ceased, or an economic mediation authority that helps nations unwind sanctions and restore trade relationships, or an information warfare monitoring agency that verifies both sides are ceasing propaganda operations. These institutions would work because they provide face-saving mechanisms. Nations can agree to their involvement without admitting defeat, can cite their recommendations as reasons for policy changes, and can use their verification to rebuild trust with adversaries. There's also the possibility of technological solutions to ending conflicts. If AI systems can identify when both sides have achieved minimum acceptable objectives, they might propose settlement terms that neither side would suggest themselves, but that both can accept. If quantum-secured communication allows leaders to negotiate in complete confidence that no intelligence service is listening, it might enable honest discussions about off-ramps that public posturing makes impossible. But perhaps the most important factor in how future wars end is the simple human capacity to adapt and learn. We've been fighting wars for thousands of years, and we've learned from each one. The catastrophic losses of World War I taught us something about the costs of total war. The nuclear standoff of the Cold War taught us about deterrence and brinksmanship. The endless conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq taught us about the limitations of military power in achieving political objectives. By 2040, we'll have learned new lessons about cyber warfare, information campaigns, and economic conflict. We'll have developed new norms, new institutions, and new mechanisms for managing and concluding these conflicts. Some of that learning will come from successful de-escalations we can study and replicate. Some will come from failures and near catastrophes that force us to develop better systems. The key insight is this: wars in 2040 won't end with clear victories and defeats. They'll end through de-escalation, mutual exhaustion, economic pressure, technological solutions, international mediation, and domestic political demands. They'll end ambiguously, with both sides claiming success and neither admitting failure. They'll end gradually, with intensity decreasing over time rather than stopping suddenly. And in many cases, they won't fully end at all. Instead, conflicts will reach equilibrium states where low-level operations continue indefinitely, but at intensities that all parties can tolerate. This permanent state of managed tension might be the new normal, replacing the binary of war and peace with a spectrum of conflict intensity that nations navigate continuously. This isn't the clean, satisfying conclusion that history books prefer, but it might be more stable than total victories that humiliate losers and create resentments that fuel future conflicts. If both sides can claim they achieved objectives, if neither is crushed and desperate, if economic ties remain intact and cooperation on shared challenges continues, then maybe these ambiguous endings are actually progress. The wars of 2040 will end not with treaties signed at grand ceremonies, but with quiet decisions made in crisis rooms, with algorithms suggesting de-escalation pathways, with economic pressures creating incentives for peace, with exhausted populations demanding normalcy, and with leaders recognizing that continued conflict serves no one's interests. Understanding this is crucial because it shapes how we approach conflicts when they emerge. If we know that total victory is unlikely and that ambiguous endings are probable, we can focus diplomacy on creating off-ramps early, on maintaining communication channels even during conflict, on preserving economic and institutional ties that provide mechanisms for resolution. The future of how wars end is really about creating systems that make wars easier to stop once they start, and ultimately harder to start in the first place. Behind all the technology, strategy, and geopolitics, wars remain fundamentally human experiences. By 2040, the nature of that human experience will have transformed in ways that profoundly affect how conflicts unfold and how they impact us all. Let's start with the soldiers themselves, because the role of the warrior is changing more dramatically than at any point since the invention of gunpowder. The modern soldier is becoming less of a fighter and more of an operator. Walk into a military training facility today, and you'll find more people learning to pilot drones from control stations, analyze satellite imagery, write code for cyber operations, and manage AI systems than learning hand-to-hand combat. By 2040, this trend will be absolute. The majority of military personnel will never fire a weapon at another human being. Instead, they'll be managing systems, analyzing data, and making decisions from behind screens. This creates a strange psychological distance from violence. When you're operating a drone from an air-conditioned trailer thousands of miles from the target, killing becomes abstract. You watch through a screen, press a button, see an explosion rendered in grayscale infrared. Then you drive home, have dinner with your family, and return the next day to do it again. Some drone operators have described it as surreal, playing the most consequential video game imaginable, where the pixels represent real human lives. The psychological impact of this distance is still being understood. Traditional combat creates bonds between soldiers forged in shared danger. It produces trauma from direct exposure to violence and death. But it also creates clear moral frameworks. You were there, you saw the threat, you defended yourself and your unit. Remote warfare blurs all of this. Operators suffer from moral injury, even without physical danger. Struggling with the meaning of violence they inflict through intermediated systems on people who couldn't threaten them personally. By 2040, military training will include extensive psychological preparation for this strange form of combat. Ethics courses will grapple with questions that have no clear answers. When is it justified to kill someone remotely based on algorithmic analysis of their behavior patterns? How do you maintain humanity and moral judgment when violence becomes a series of menu selections and target confirmations? What does honor mean when warfare happens through screens? The demographics of military forces are shifting too. In many advanced nations, attracting recruits has become difficult as economies offer better opportunities and populations question military adventures. This accelerates the move towards smaller, more technologically sophisticated forces. The United States military is shrinking in total personnel while maintaining or increasing capabilities through technology. By 2040, major militaries might be half their current size, but far more lethal. This creates interesting social dynamics. Military service, once a common experience that connected civilians to their armed forces, becomes specialized and rare. In the United States, less than 1% of the population serves in the military. That number will likely shrink further. This distance between military and civilian society means that wars can be fought with less direct impact on most citizens, making it easier for governments to sustain conflicts that would have been politically impossible when more families had loved ones at risk. But there's a counterbalancing force: information access. While fewer people serve in militaries, more people have instant access to information about conflicts. Soldiers themselves, equipped with smartphones and social media accounts, document and share their experiences in real time. This creates unprecedented transparency that constrains how militaries can operate. A war crime captured on video can reach millions within hours. Civilian casualties documented by locals undermine official narratives almost instantly. By 2040, this transparency will be even more complete. Body cameras, AI-monitored communications, satellite coverage. Everything will be recorded and potentially accessible. This creates powerful accountability mechanisms, but also new challenges. How do soldiers operate effectively when they know every action might be scrutinized globally? How do nations maintain operational security when information flows freely? How do we distinguish truth from fabricated content designed to undermine military operations? The civilian population's relationship to conflict is also transforming. In previous eras, wars happened over there. Soldiers went to battlefields, while civilians remained relatively safe in their home countries. But in cyber warfare, information campaigns, and economic conflicts, there is no over there. Everyone is potentially on the front line. Your bank account could be frozen by foreign sanctions. Your job might disappear because supply chains are disrupted by distant conflicts. Your social media feeds might be filled with propaganda designed to influence your political views. Your power might go out because of cyber attacks on the grid. War reaches into your home not through bombs, but through the digital and economic systems you depend on daily. This creates a different kind of wartime experience, not the acute terror of aerial bombardment or invasion, but a chronic stress of uncertainty and disruption. You don't know what's safe to believe. You don't know if systems you rely on will work tomorrow. You feel the economic impacts, but struggle to understand their causes. This ambient anxiety might be less intense than direct violence, but it's more pervasive and harder to escape. By 2040, populations will have adapted to this reality in various ways. Some will develop sophisticated media literacy and critical thinking skills to navigate information warfare. Others will retreat into echo chambers where comfortable narratives shield them from uncomfortable truths. Some will disengage entirely, becoming apathetic toward conflicts they feel powerless to influence. Others will become hyper-engaged, using social media and digital tools to organize resistance, document abuses, and pressure their governments. The younger generations coming of age by 2040 will have a fundamentally different relationship with conflict than their grandparents. They'll have grown up in a world where cyber attacks, disinformation, and economic warfare were constant background noise. They won't remember a clear distinction between war and peace. For them, the question won't be whether conflict is happening, but what intensity it's at and how it affects their daily lives. This might sound dystopian, but there's an interesting possibility. Populations that grow up managing chronic low-level conflict might be better at preventing escalation to catastrophic violence. If you're constantly aware of tensions and trained to think critically about information, you might be less susceptible to the propaganda and emotional manipulation that has historically driven populations toward total war. You might demand more from your leaders in terms of diplomatic solutions and conflict de-escalation. The trauma of future conflicts will manifest differently too. Instead of millions suffering from combat-related PTSD, we'll see different patterns. Information warfare creates anxiety and paranoia. Economic warfare creates stress and depression. Cyber attacks create feelings of vulnerability and violation. The mental health impacts might be less visible than physical war wounds, but they'll be widespread and persistent. By 2040, mental health systems will need to adapt to this new reality. We'll need therapies for trauma that doesn't come from direct violence, but from chronic uncertainty and manipulation. We'll need ways to help people maintain psychological resilience in environments where truth is contested and threats are invisible. We'll need community support systems that can function even when traditional institutions are compromised or distrusted. There's also the question of who suffers most in future conflicts. In traditional wars, soldiers bore the primary burden. In future conflicts, the distribution of suffering becomes more complex. A cyber attack on a hospital might primarily harm patients and medical staff. Economic sanctions might devastate the poor, while the wealthy find ways around them. Information warfare might particularly damage vulnerable populations who lack the education or resources to critically evaluate what they're told. This raises profound moral questions about the conduct of future warfare. If your cyber attack on an enemy's power grid causes hospital patients to die, are you responsible for their deaths, even though you didn't directly target them? If your economic sanctions create famine, have you committed a war crime, even though you never fired a weapon? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're being debated right now in international law and military ethics circles. By 2040, we'll hopefully have developed clearer norms and laws around these questions. But the reality is that warfare has always caused civilian suffering, and new forms of conflict will continue this tragic pattern, just through different mechanisms. Yet there are reasons for hope in the human element of future warfare. The very technologies that enable new forms of conflict also enable new forms of resistance and resilience. Communities can organize mutual aid through digital platforms when government systems fail. Whistleblowers can expose war crimes and atrocities with greater safety through encrypted communications. Civil society organizations can coordinate globally to provide humanitarian assistance and document violations. The power of individual actors has never been greater. A single person with technical skills and moral courage can potentially expose corruption, prevent escalation, or save lives in ways that would have been impossible in previous eras. We've seen individuals leak documents that changed public understanding of conflicts. Hackers defend critical infrastructure from attacks, and ordinary citizens use social media to organize remarkable acts of collective resistance. By 2040, this distributed power will be even more pronounced. The question is whether we can channel it constructively toward peace and justice rather than toward further conflict and destruction. The human element also includes the leaders making decisions about war and peace. By 2040, a new generation will hold power. People who grew up with the internet, who understand technology intuitively, who have different assumptions about what's possible and what's dangerous. They might be more cautious about conflicts because they better understand how quickly they can spiral out of control. Or they might be more reckless because they've never experienced the full horror of total war personally. Leadership in crisis moments will require managing complexity that exceeds human cognitive capacity. AI systems will recommend courses of action based on analysis of thousands of variables. Intelligence agencies will provide floods of information that no one can fully process. Allies and adversaries will all be making moves simultaneously. In this environment, the human qualities of wisdom, judgment, and moral clarity become more important than ever, even as they become harder to maintain. The most important aspect of the human element might be our capacity for empathy and imagination. Throughout history, the worst atrocities happened when people stopped seeing their enemies as human. when they reduce them to abstractions or stereotypes. In an age of remote warfare and algorithmic targeting, this dehumanization becomes easier than ever. The pilot pressing a button might never see the faces of those killed. The cyber warrior disrupting a power grid might never meet the patients who die when hospital systems fail. Maintaining our humanity in this environment requires conscious effort. It requires reminding ourselves that every data point represents a real person, that every strategic objective involves human lives and suffering, that our enemies are human beings with families and hopes and fears just like us. This isn't weakness. It's the foundation of moral behavior and ultimately of peace. By 2040, the societies that successfully navigate future conflicts will be those that maintain this human element even while deploying sophisticated technology. They'll be the ones that use technology to enhance human judgment rather than replace it, that create accountability mechanisms to prevent atrocities, that preserve empathy and ethical reasoning in military training and operations, that refuse to allow warfare to become so abstract and distant that we forget its real costs. The human element is ultimately what determines whether future wars become catastrophic or whether we learn to manage them, limit them, and eventually transcend them. Technology shapes the battlefield, but humans decide whether to fight, how to fight, and when to stop fighting. That fundamental truth hasn't changed and won't change by 2040, no matter how sophisticated our weapons and systems become. We've traveled through the landscape of future warfare together. We've examined the new battlefields, the actors and their tools, the economic pressures, how conflicts begin and how they might end, and the human experience within all of this transformation. Now, we arrive at the most important question. What does all of this mean for us, for how we live our lives, and for the choices we make? The first truth to accept is that certainty is gone. We can't know exactly how future wars will unfold because they depend on technologies still being developed, decisions not yet made, and events impossible to predict. Anyone claiming to know the future with confidence is either lying or deluded. What we can do is understand the forces shaping tomorrow and prepare ourselves to navigate whatever emerges. This uncertainty isn't comfortable. Human beings crave predictability and control. We want to know that our governments will protect us, that systems we depend on will work, that tomorrow will resemble today in its fundamental patterns. But the world of 2040 won't offer those guarantees. Conflicts will emerge from unexpected directions, escalate in surprising ways, and resolve ambiguously. Learning to live with this uncertainty while maintaining hope and agency is perhaps the most important skill we can develop. So what can individuals and communities actually do? More than you might think. Start with information literacy. In an age where disinformation is weaponized and deepfakes are indistinguishable from reality, your ability to think critically about information is a form of defense. Learn to verify sources, cross-reference claims, understand how algorithms shape what you see, and recognize manipulation tactics. Teach these skills to children and practice them yourself. A population that can't be easily manipulated is more resilient to information warfare. Build community resilience. When systems fail, whether from cyber attacks, economic disruption, or climate disasters, communities with strong social bonds weather crises better than atomized individuals. Know your neighbors. Participate in local organizations. Create mutual aid networks. Develop local food systems and energy sources where possible. This isn't survivalist paranoia. It's practical preparation for a world where disruptions will be more frequent. Support institutions and norms that prevent conflicts. International law, diplomatic channels, independent journalism, human rights organizations, climate action groups. These aren't abstractions. They're practical mechanisms that make war less likely and peace more achievable. Strengthen them through participation, funding, or simply by refusing to let cynicism erode them. When leaders violate norms or withdraw from treaties, hold them accountable. Cultivate empathy across divides. Future conflicts will depend partly on whether populations can be mobilized to hate their designated enemies. If you maintain personal connections across national, ethnic, and ideological boundaries, if you refuse to dehumanize people based on their government's actions, you become slightly harder to manipulate towards supporting conflict. Multiply that by millions of people, and it matters. Stay informed, but don't become consumed by anxiety. There's a balance between awareness and obsession. You need to understand the world's challenges to respond intelligently, but constant exposure to crisis news damages your mental health and decision-making. Set boundaries around information consumption. Take action where you can, then focus on living your life well. Develop practical skills that have value in various scenarios. Technical literacy, medical knowledge, food production, conflict resolution, languages. These aren't just career assets. They're capabilities that make you and your community more resilient whatever comes. The future might need people who can grow food, fix systems, heal wounds, mediate disputes, and communicate across differences as much as it needs specialists in narrow technical fields. For those in positions of influence, whether as business leaders, government officials, educators, or community organizers, the responsibilities are greater. You have the power to shape how conflicts unfold and resolve. Use that power to create transparency, accountability, and paths toward de-escalation. Design systems with security and resilience built in. Foster cultures that value truth and dialogue over polarization and demonization. Support policies that address root causes of conflict like inequality, climate change, and resource scarcity. For young people growing up in this era, the advice is both sobering and empowering. You're inheriting a world with serious challenges, but also unprecedented tools and possibilities. Learn deeply about technology, not just how to use it, but how it shapes society and conflict. Study history to understand patterns of how changes unfold. Develop moral clarity about right and wrong, even when situations are complex. And most importantly, don't accept that current trajectories are inevitable. You have agency to shape different futures. There are reasons for cautious optimism alongside the concerns we've explored. Humanity has faced existential challenges before and found ways through. We've built institutions that, however imperfect, have helped prevent great power wars for nearly 80 years. We've developed norms against chemical and biological weapons that most nations observe. We've created global economic systems that give nations incentives for cooperation. We've connected billions of people who can see each other's humanity despite their government's conflicts. The very forces that create new vulnerabilities also create new capacities for peace. The same AI that could trigger accidental escalation could also identify de-escalation opportunities. The same cyber capabilities that threaten infrastructure can also expose corruption and atrocities. The same global connectivity that enables information warfare also enables solidarity and mutual understanding. The same economic interdependence that creates vulnerabilities also creates stakeholders in peace. By 2040, we'll have learned from the conflicts and near misses of the 2020s and 2030s. We'll have developed new international frameworks for managing cyber conflicts, new norms around information warfare, new mechanisms for verifying compliance with agreements, and new institutions designed specifically for the challenges of this era. These won't eliminate conflict, but they might make catastrophic outcomes less likely. Climate change, which we've discussed as a driver of conflict, might also become a force for cooperation. As nations realize they face common threats that dwarf their rivalries, they might find ways to work together despite tensions in other areas. We've seen hints of this already, with environmental agreements maintained even when other diplomatic relations broke down. By 2040, the imperative of survival might overcome the impulse toward conflict. Technology will continue evolving in ways we can't fully anticipate. Some developments will make conflict more dangerous, but others might make peace more achievable. Quantum communication could enable perfectly secure diplomatic channels. Advanced AI might identify creative solutions to seemingly intractable disputes. New energy technologies could reduce resource competition. Breakthroughs in food production could address scarcity. We don't know what's coming, but not all surprises will be negative. The most important thing to understand is that the future remains open. The scenarios we've explored are possibilities based on current trajectories, but trajectories can change. Every choice we make, individually and collectively, influences which futures become real. This isn't naive optimism. It's recognition that history is made by human decisions, and those decisions haven't all been made yet. If enough people understand how future wars might unfold, they become less likely because we can work to prevent them. If enough communities build resilience, the impacts of conflicts are reduced. If enough leaders prioritize de-escalation and cooperation, alternatives to war become more viable. If enough institutions adapt to new challenges, mechanisms for managing conflicts improve. If enough young people commit to different values than previous generations, entirely new approaches become possible. We're living through a transformation as significant as any in human history. The world of 2040 will be as different from today as today is from 1950. That transformation will include conflicts and challenges we can barely imagine, but it will also include capabilities and solutions we haven't yet conceived. How it unfolds depends partly on forces beyond individual control, but also on the cumulative impact of millions of small choices about how to respond to uncertainty. Choose to stay informed without becoming paralyzed. Choose to build connections across divides. Choose to strengthen institutions rather than tear them down cynically. Choose to develop your capabilities and share them generously. Choose to maintain hope without denying reality. Choose to act where you can while accepting what you can't control. These choices matter, perhaps more than we can know. The question isn't whether there will be conflicts by 2040. There will be. The question is whether they escalate to catastrophe or whether we learn to manage them, contain them, and resolve them before they consume us. The answer depends on what we do between now and then. Future wars might unfold through cyber attacks and information campaigns, through economic pressure and resource competition, through accidents and miscalculations as much as through deliberate aggression. They might end not with clear victories, but with exhausted compromises, not with peace treaties, but with gradual de-escalation, not with resolution, but with learning to live with managed tensions. None of this is inevitable. We're not passengers watching predetermined events unfold. We're participants shaping outcomes through countless daily choices about how to respond to fear, how to treat others, how to use our voices and votes and resources, how to imagine different possibilities. The sleepy futurist's final wisdom is this: stay awake to the challenges, but don't let them steal your sleep. Understand the dangers, but don't let them paralyze you. Prepare for difficulties, but don't lose sight of possibilities. Work for peace, but don't expect perfection. And remember that throughout history, even in the darkest times, human beings have found ways to create light, to choose connection over division, to build rather than destroy. The future of warfare by 2040 isn't written yet. We're writing it now, together, through everything we do and fail to do, through courage and cowardice, wisdom and folly, hope and despair. Make your contribution count. Choose well, and trust that others are making similar choices, creating a future that might just be better than we fear, and wiser than our worst impulses. The long view of history suggests grounds for careful hope. We've abolished slavery, reduced extreme poverty, nearly eliminated certain diseases, connected the planet, and gone longer without great power war than any comparable period in modern history. We've done hard things before. We can do hard things again. What comes next is uncertain, but it's ours to shape. And that responsibility, daunting as it is, also represents our greatest source of power and hope.